The Lord be with you. Let us pray. Oh God, open our eyes to wider horizons than we have imagined. Unstop our ears to hear your voice in unexpected places. Enlighten our hearts to know your presence, and grant us to find you everywhere and in all your children. Amen. It's my privilege to introduce to you Paul Traynor, who is a local Wilmette person, has a media production firm that he runs. But he has also lots of different experiences of thin places, and that's why he's here today. One of them is the heart attack that we talked about, which could be a thin space, and for those of you who have had that before. But he has several things that he wants to share with us in terms of thin spaces. So if everybody can find a seat, and we can get started. So let's give a round of applause for Mr. Paul Traynor.
Thank you. Thanks, Chris. Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Is my mic all right? Everyone can hear me okay? Great. Well, it's great to be here. Thank you again for having me, and to my friend Tina for suggesting me. I'm excited to be here. I've been thinking about it a lot, but I didn't prepare notes officially, so we'll have to see how it goes. I live in Wilmette. I'm a father of 5. My parents are Irish immigrants. I grew up in Indiana. I'm the youngest of 7 children. So we kind of come from, I guess, the original home of thin places, right? Or at least that area of the world. And, when I was thinking about this, I was looking it up in the historical part, and I really kind of came to several places where, for me, the definition of a thin place is, those handful of times when I feel God's presence kind of overwhelmingly. And so I thought I would kind of talk about a couple of those times in my life, and then, how I try to approach it now in my daily living. I was raised Catholic, Irish Catholic, as you might imagine. My wife is a good Presbyterian, so I've been a Presbyterian now for about 15 or 20 years, so I think that probably averages me out to be an Episcopalian. So I do feel comfortable here. But I didn't have a real faith, as a Catholic, it's kind of the fear was heavy, the suffering was heavy, the guilt was, part of it, but not the rest. And I was also way too smart for it, especially when I went to college and in high school. I became an atheist, and then an angry atheist, and self-righteous atheist, and all of the fun stages that people can have in college and after. But shortly after college, my sister, as I said, I'm the youngest of 7. I have my oldest sister. She was the 3rd. She was very close to me. She was about 12 years older. She was in her mid-30s and had 3 kids. My niece, Megan, was 3, or actually she was 2, and the twins were 1, boy and a girl twins. And she was diagnosed out of nowhere with cancer. And it was one of those diagnoses where it was like, better come in, and it had metastasized throughout her bones, and she was basically given 6 months out of that. And so we had a lot of good time together in that. I was waiting tables after school. I went to school as an actor, so I'd begun my calling as a waiter for a number of years. And I was able to fly home on weekends through Southwest to Indianapolis and be with her. And, I was there in the room when she died. And my mom and dad were there, and she'd said goodbye to her husband and kids, and she was in my parents' bed at their house, and it was dark. And she had, been going in and out for days. I mean, if any of you have dealt with someone in the late stages of an illness like that, they kind of come and go, especially at the end. And, things seem to get very kind of thin around them, just in that nature. And she kind of said to her husband before he left that night to go back to the kids that she was either going to go in 3 hours. She asked permission if it was okay for her to go now, and he said yes, of course. And she said, I'm going to go in either 3 hours or 5 hours. And I thought that was really strange when he'd said it. So I looked at the clock, and I think it was like 2 a.m. when he'd left. And then she died at like 6, almost on the dot, 6:01, whatever it was like split the uprights. And she died with my mom and my dad and my sister and the other sister in the room. And there was an energy shift. I felt that she was gone. I just kind of felt that switch. And I'd looked at her, and she'd become very small and kind of wizened through the cancer, you know, had kind of really ravaged her. She'd done chemo and radiation. But right after she died, I looked, and her face relaxed, and it looked like her again, you know. Was kind of the last thought. And as we were there with my mom was, you know, kind of keening, as, you know, good Irish moms do, especially in a time of such horror, I just saw this crack under the blind was down of the sun, you know, and it was like almost right after she went, and I just saw this crack of light coming in, and the day came in, you know, the sun came up, and it was really surreal, but it just stayed with me, you know. She had to really, I mean, the fact that she was able to process it and go through it the way she did with such fortitude and such courage, she was a very strong and successful woman, but I felt like no one can go through that by the unaided will, you know, especially with the grace that she'd had. So, you know, that was the first inkling to me that there was something bigger, you know, and then the beauty of this sunrise, it was like, you know, the day is back and it will never, ever be the same again, ever, and yet it's beautiful and new this morning. And I went and sat at a grave of one of my teachers who died and, you know, cried. So that was that, but, you know, I still wasn't quite ready to feel it and hear it, although then I met a cute blonde a number of years later. We got married, moved to Wilmette, had a couple kids. I was very involved at First Presbyterian Church of Evanston for quite a few years. She was born and raised in that church, and we had a time there where we were forced to kind of, not forced, but we had to kind of make a stand about an issue that was very important to us about inclusion, you know, because my sense, even though I had an intellectual belief in God at that point. I didn't really believe necessarily, but I felt that if there is God, it must be love and it must be truth, and that's where it manifests. So everybody has to be part of it. Everybody has to be saved. We all have to be in it together, and I still think that, but it's not just intellectual now. So anyway, we left that church, and it was a really rough time, but what it forced me to do, because we'd gotten very close, and she'd been there forever, and we'd kind of left, you know, wagging our fingers a bit about, you know, their treatment of gay people and the lack of inclusion. And I don't know where you guys stand on it. It doesn't matter, I promise. It matters to me personally, but not, you know, for your theology. But what I found for myself is that I was out there taking a moral stance because I was a middle-aged, you know, guy with kids, and, you know, we felt like we had to speak up for the people who, you know, were really suffering. It was an ugly scene, and they were suffering. But what I came to terms with is that I realized as I tried to do this, and this, you know, my wife was clinging to me and people were, you know, saying all this moral thing, is that I'd had a secret that I'd carried for probably since my sister died or before, which is that I'm an alcoholic. And I was also a big pot smoker. I like to, I did that on the grave when I should go back and amend that story, because that was always part of it. And I struggled with it for years. You know, I traveled for business. I'd been successful. I didn't really let it be around my kids. I didn't want to have it seep into my life, but it had become this kind of secret. When I traveled with business, I would do it, etc., and all. So the second thin place was this night, which had repeated a night that I'd gotten caught in this rhythm for quite a long time, when I was just, you know, at the end of my rope, and I was walking in the evenings as I used to do, because I also used to smoke cigarettes, and that was the only way I could get out there and do that. And I was wandering through Lovelace Park, which is not too far from us, right on Evanston, and I got to the tennis courts, and again, it was probably about 1 in the morning, and I just realized I can't do this anymore. I am exhausted. You know, whatever I thought was fun about this that kept me going for so long has got me here right now, exhausted and defeated and hiding this lie and valuing this, you know, substance over everything. You know, they say where your heart is, there's your treasure. And sadly, that's what it had become for me. I mean, I have a wife that I love. I had 4 children at that time that I love. And, you know, I was like living in darkness, you know, really, literally out on the, you know, outskirts, because I had a lot of pain. You know, I had a lot of fear, which, you know, I still have somewhat today. But that night I just had it, and I felt for the first time I can't do it. And so I admitted defeat. I raised the white flag. I'm like, I called Uncle. You know, I knew about recovery from my family, so I got on my phone, I found a meeting, I got some help, and I went into recovery. And very early on in that, because I was, you know, felt I couldn't do it anymore, I did what I never, ever thought I would do, and it's still mildly embarrassing to admit, which is that I went home and I got down on my knees at the side of my bed, and I said, all right, Jesus, if you're real, if you're out there, if you're listening, you know, is this on? I can't do this by myself. So I give it up. You know, if you can do this, do something with it, because I can't do anything with it. And, you know, for me, that became the game changer, because I really felt like almost immediately that the desire to drink and, you know, do these things was lifted in a way that I could not have done. You know, when you're under an addiction or you're under something you struggle with like that, you know, it's like a boulder on you, this massive weight, and you simply don't have the leverage to remove it. You just couldn't. So for me, that leverage was grace, and I believe is God, and I've come to believe more and more in the interim that it's Christ. So fast forward a couple of years, I'm still in recovery. We've got a new church. We're very active there. My wife is the new director of children's ministry down at First Pres in Wilmette, and we also had a little bonus baby that came in sobriety. As I got a lot healthier, I started practicing yoga quite a bit, and I lost about 50 pounds and everything. And so in our mid-40s, we became new parents again. And just one little thin space here, as I was thinking about this too, is out on your sidewalk, because I was so overwhelmed, and when I had this baby, it was like, you know, just the most beautiful thing. If you have a younger one, you know you can relax and kind of enjoy it in a way that, you know, you can't when you're younger and you're scared and all of this. But we were walking our little bonus baby down the sidewalk here, and all of you, or I assume at least some of you, I know Tina was there, were out on the lawn, and you guys had an Elton John impersonator. And he was playing Elton John, and he played this song by Elton John, Love Song, which is one of my favorites. It's kind of obscure. It's on Tumbleweed Connection, you know, but it's love is the opening door, love is what we came here for, you know. And I saw Tina's smiling face, and she gave me a hug, and you were all in your lovely finery, and the guy looked and sounded, or it didn't look like, sounded like Elton John, and it was beautiful. It was one of those moments, you know, where you just kind of, your heart fills, and it feels like, oh, God is here. And, you know, I kind of feel like that's that way all the time if I choose to focus on it, you know. Before I thought that was, you know, that was because I was special or megalomaniacal or both, you know, that, oh, how presumptuous of me to think God is there. But these times when you're kind of outside of yourself, God just emerges. So the one that you guys were going to hear about, the real crowd pleaser, I'll get to now, which is my heart attack. Again, I was out wandering, not by myself this time, but with my dog 2.5 years ago, and it was after dinner on a Sunday evening, and I was walking through Mallinckrodt. You know, it's about a mile circuit for me to go to Mallinckrodt and then back to my house. I'm at 16th and Central in Wilmette. And had a new puppy and was walking, and usually in the evening, it was May 31st, there's people out and, you know, at least walking around dogs, and there was no one there, not at all, and it was like damp. I remember, I could feel it in the air, and I went through, there's a gate on the back side that I come in from Harvard, is the road that comes off Lake there, and I came in, and it was like just this cold, like fog, you know, and no one was around, and it felt, at the time, like a thin place, and I had been feeling anxiety for a number of days, like, you know, heavy duty, and I'd been feeling pain in my neck and in my triceps, but again, I practiced yoga, and I thought it was that. I'd had a few practices, and I'm like, okay, I have this. And I'm sitting there, and I start to feel, you know, burping and a little uncomfortable. So I'm Googling heart attack symptoms, you know, as on my phone with my dog. But, of course, it says, you know, pain in your chest, compression, all of this, and I didn't have that. Now, one of my good friends pointed out very helpfully later that, you know, for future reference, Googling a heart attack should be considered probably one of the chief signs of having a heart attack. So, you know, if you have to Google it, then, you know, it might be worth the call. But, you know, again, you know, sheer unaided will rather than surrender or admit it or, you know, and in some ways it was like addiction in that when you're in it, you can't see it. You know what I mean? You want to see it when you're in it, but you're already compromised to the point that you don't have that outside perspective, you know, which I think is, you know, the God view, they call it in yoga, you know, the divine consciousness or, you know, the Holy Spirit. So anyway, I went home. My daughter was there. She was 12 at the time, and she said, Dad, I flopped on the couch. She said, Dad, are you okay? I said, I'm either fine or I'm having a heart attack, which seems like a weird thing to say again. My wife came down and saw me and said, we have to go to the hospital. I said, no, we don't. We're fine. We don't have to go. And yes, we do. And I just wanted to take a nap. I just felt tired. And once I lay down, I felt better. So you always wonder how someone can just, you know, go out, take the garbage out, and die. Well, I just wanted to take a nap. And I didn't, you know, I thought that seemed like the best thing to do, and I'll see you in an hour. She got me in the car. She's driving me. Again, still no ambulance because I'm a slow study. But as we're driving down Ridge towards Skokie Hospital, which we went to because I didn't want to go all the way over to Evanston because I figured I was going to pay $500 for a roll of Tums and be sent home, and I didn't want to miss Game of Thrones. True. So we got there, and as we're driving there, rather, I could see the dashboard literally, like it felt like it was moving away from me, and it felt like, you know, kind of just the edges were starting to go dark, and it was like this kind of tunnel, like this removal that was away. And so I got to the hospital. I slumped into a chair, and I said, I think I might be having a heart attack. And I mean, within minutes, I was in a wheelchair. I was whisked back. I was surrounded by the urgent care team. They were cutting my shirt off with scissors, peeling off all of my layers, putting needles into me, and I saw the doctor come in, and I said, do I have to do this? And they said, okay, catheterize him. And I was not thinking clearly, so I thought he meant something else. And I was like, no, no, no. But it was my heart they were talking about, thankfully. So I said, I said, do I have to? And he said, well, you don't have to, but you're having a heart attack. So anyway, I saw my wife behind him looking terrified. And I was whisked in. The cardiologist on call, Philip Krause is a great cardiologist and saved my life. They brought me in. I was on the table within 25 minutes of having arrived, and I had a 100% blockage in my artery. It wasn't the widowmaker. It was the right descending coronary, or the right coronary artery, but I had 100% blockage. And I was lying on the table, and they keep you awake during whatever, I can't think of the word right now, but when you're getting, roto-rootered, when they go in with a spring, they keep you awake so that you can kind of move and get help with this. And I was kind of, I was on some medication, and it was the first, buzz I'd had for a couple of years. So I'm not going to say that didn't factor in. But I know it wasn't the reality, which was deeper. The reality was that I felt, they talk about your life flashing in front of you. I didn't really have that, but I could tell by the tone the doctor was using and the nurses were using, this kind of very clipped, polite, but like fast, we're doing this, that the jury was out, like I'm dying. And I could feel myself kind of shifting. But what was weird is by the time I got to the hospital, there was no fear, like at all. But I had this sense of love that kind of grew in me. And what I felt was like not my life flashing before me, but this love welling out of me for all of the people I'd known and all of the experiences and all of the, just life that I'd had, And I felt like not only was it like limitless flowing out of me, which was very surreal, but that I was just present and enveloped by it, and that, even this doctor and these nurses who were urgently working to save my life were acting, in love at that moment, even though they didn't know me, but they were holding my life. So it was really profound. And then I had I was saved that, he said, he put the spring in and he said, perfect, when he popped the spring, and I could feel the blood, like my body warmed, and it was like opening up, and I just started weeping on the table. Just weeping, and I told, the cardiologist told me later that I'd said I'd loved him and everyone else, and I said, you just saved my life. I said, I'm still very fond of you at the very minimum, I hope that's not weird for you, but, it was great, and, like everything in life, I came off on the spiritual high, and I felt so great and connected in this love, and my friends reached out, and they visited me in the hospital, and then a month and a half later, the bottom dropped out because, a lot of times with these types of procedures, a depression will follow on the heels of it. And, it came down on me fast, like, it was like a chill to the bones, really, like this, descending chill. And I had to work through that, and that was really tricky. But this kind of brings me to my thought about this in terms of my own faith. I wasn't going to talk about this thin space. I thought those were the only ones I have, but I do have one more quick one. Which I'm afraid is not an upper, but I travel for business, as I said, and 2 weeks ago today, I flew out to Las Vegas for a trade show and checked in at about 6 o'clock to Mandalay Bay, which is where I was sitting in my room at 10 or whatever time I heard the noise, which I honestly thought was like a helicopter or a plane engine. I mean, you don't process that's what it was. I'd gone to the check-in, and the woman had said, do you want a room, towards the elevator or the end of the hall? And I said, oh, I don't really care. And she said, how about I got a great room on the 4th floor facing the Strip and the airport. And I said, great. And I thought about it for a second, and then I said, you know what? I'd rather have something quiet. I don't want to be that close to the ground. It'll be noisy, and, could you give me something else? And she said, well, I have something, but it's up higher, and it's got a mountain-facing view. And I said, sold, I'll take it, it's great. Now, had I not done that, I would have been sitting in my room looking out, like, at the carnage, like, right there, because that's where my room would have been, and I would have been looking at the crime scene for the next 4 days because I was still there, up close and personal every day. So I'm grateful for that. I don't think God moved me, but I do feel like it was grace that I was spared that view for whatever reason. But what I did see was the people the next day, once we got off lockdown, I had the SWAT team in my room at 2 in the morning, like bang, 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 bang. I went to bed not knowing exactly what had happened. But the SWAT team, bang, 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 came in, and there was a flashlight on me on my bed, and I woke up, and I just heard, sir, are you alone in the room? I didn't really know what it was. I just saw the flashlight and, glasses. And I said, yes. I said, sir, are you hurt? No. Is there anyone else in the room? No. All right. Sorry for interrupting. I'm like dead asleep. So like, because and this is funny, this is being in recovery, my faith as it is now, what I did is we have this little prayer of just turning it over. And I thought, my heart was racing and I could hear him banging and going up and down the halls. And I thought, oh no, what the world is ending. And then I thought, what can I do about it? I got to work tomorrow. So I said, God, please be with me and help me out. And I was asleep within a minute and a half. Woke up the next day and realized the horror. And once we were lifted off lockdown, I wasn't able to go out to the Strip, but I was able to walk through the hotels there, it's Luxor and then Excalibur, and there was nothing. The casino was empty, and if you've gone to Vegas for work, there's so many times, it's like, there's nothing weirder than a casino with no noise. No tables, no dealers. The lights are still going, but it's really weird. And then as I was sitting at so I had to go up to Excalibur to find a Krispy Kreme that had no food, but they had coffee. And I got coffee and some pretzels from the gift shop for my breakfast. And I sat there right as they lifted the lockdown, and people started streaming back through, like dozens and dozens of people in country and western garb, some of them covered in dirt down the side, some of them were bandaged and in casts, and everyone had this shell-shocked look, of just grief and panic and fear. And so, the reason that I say that, it sounds like all just so terrible and all, but when I thought about it as my thin space, the God of my understanding now is always there. And it's what I thought before. It's love and it's truth and it's always present. So I don't think God ever is away from me. So in that case, God can't ever really come closer to me. But what happens from time to time, I think, in our lives is that we get hit with something of such a magnitude that all of our filters and our kind of ego and our own little, day-to-day objectives and goals get stripped away. And in that place where my sister died, and when I had my heart attack, and there at the Mandalay Bay, and even outside on the sidewalk here, it's just there wasn't space for me in that because God was so present. So that death of the ego, my ego is a real problem. I came here from a place where we were talking about humility this morning. And, I told everyone that I am, one of the most humble people that I know. And they told me to come back next week. But, that level of humility, and I don't want to go too long, but I want to end here with this because I am a believing Christian now. And, there's still a lot of it I don't believe in terms of a lot of the Old Testament stuff necessarily, this, that, and the other. It doesn't matter to me. It's capital T truth that's unassailable. But what I think of is Jesus going to the cross. And, my Catholic tradition, it was all the suffering of that and whatever. But I also am a big fan of Joseph Campbell in The Hero's Adventure. And he talks about, the monomyth, the hero with 1,000 faces. And, Christ is, the perfect iteration of that. So C.S. Lewis, who became one of the great Protestant apologists for, Christianity and great writers of Christianity of the 20th century, was an agnostic too and a very angry skeptic and was converted by his friends, one of whom was J.R.R. Tolkien, who was a very devout Catholic. And Tolkien said to him, because they're old geeks, Oxford dons that like, these ancient myths, saying, think of it this way. Think of all myth is true, and Jesus is God writing his own myth. And when I thought of it that way, it got really exciting because what I thought of is, like Jesus' story is like mine and like ours. We come into a story midway through. We don't know the beginning in our own lives, right? We're just here. We don't know where we're going, but we know that there will be sacrifice and surrender and all of these things and joy. But thinking about it as God divesting himself of God and then surrendering to his death and then being brought to life and resurrected, to me that is grace. And that's the thing that I've seen experienced in each of these times. And I don't think God does the bad things that happen in the world, but I think God can give us the ability to come through them. And I think that these become thin places, where we can seek him and we can find him. And so, for me, that idea is really exciting. And again, looking at it from Joseph Campbell, he talked about the cross and said that, eternity can be experienced only in the present moment. Now, this is pretty heavy, but I think it's true. We're in eternity, is my belief. This is it. And when I think of Christ and I think of his stories and all of the different things, what he seems to be doing as often as anything is calling us into now. Be loving now. Be humble now. Be present now. Let go of your shame. Let go of your anxiety about the future, your shame of the past, and come into now. And the thing that I think is so liberating is, the anxiety about the future I'm pretty good about. I still have the shame of the past. But again, that's where the love of God and the fact that I know that I'm absolutely beloved and forgiven and uniquely created in the universe, it takes away that too. So humility is not, as friends of mine say, it's not thinking less of myself, it's just thinking of myself less. So the crucifixion and the cross, distilled to its simplest terms, and I'll promise I'll end with this, is, incarnation, crucifixion, resurrection, right? That's the turning point for all of existence and all of humanity. But, that's the beat of every story, right? Beginning, middle, end. That's the beat of our lives, every moment, the seasons, and, any transition we're going through, big or small, is that beginning, middle, and end. So approaching it from this idea of what does God want from me? How do I carry my cross? How do I go into this? The great illusion that I discovered and was grateful to discover, both in the park when I stopped drinking and gave my life to God, and also on the table when I was almost on my way out, is that there's some essential Paulness that if I don't hang on to, I'm not going to be me anymore, and I'm not going to be full, and I'm going to be compromised, and I'm going to be less than my full self. And I think that's the lie, because I saw your reading today is this Philippians, rejoice in the Lord always. The Lord is near. Do not worry about anything. In everything bring prayer and supplication, and the peace of God which surpasses all understanding will guide your hearts and minds in Christ Jesus. Now, when I heard that before 5 years ago, if you'll pardon the expression in this lovely church, I thought it was bullshit. Now I think it's, absolutely true. And it's for me to surrender, right? It's that cross. So I look at the crucifixion now as a surrender, not as a punishment. And I think there are two ways. So humility, we were talking about earlier today, and I think about humiliation. Like, we don't want humiliation, right? We want humility. But both of those things strip us of ourselves and make us raw and present and teachable and open for the loving God that exists all the time. So crucifixion from the outside was the ultimate act of humiliation. We're going to drag this guy out. We're going to put him up here. We're going to put a crown on him. We're going to make fun of him. We're going to, do all this stuff. And, oh, you're God. Look at you. You don't have that. That's humiliation. He was humiliated in his final moments. And I like the Gospel of Mark because he says at the end, my God, why have you forsaken me? And I think that's his final word there in the earliest gospel, which is like Jesus himself on the cross. The sky went black and he was left not knowing and being in fear and feeling utterly alone and bereft. But we know where that story goes. So the humiliation is the external. The other side, the path of Christ, the path I want to walk now, and I think these thin spaces give us, is that humility. Because when I can die to myself by choice, and I can do it in small ways. I can do it by not making a smart-ass comment, not having to, correct my wife if she does something, not respond if someone cuts me off in traffic. There's millions of ways, but that death of self is how I can approach my own crucifixion as an act of sacrifice for God. And the good news is not that it makes me some holy than thou, guy for future gain, but what it does is it frees me in the moment. It liberates me to right now and the ability that we are present, we are awake, we are in it, we're in the game, whatever it is. And so, I'm really grateful that I've, had these experiences. So, thanks. I guess that's the time. Absolutely. And if you didn't have those, do you think it would have been different? Yes. There's a quote that someone was reading to me yesterday. It was in a Richard Rohr, is a Franciscan monk who's almost a Buddhist, and I love him. He writes, but he says, God comes to us disguised as our own life. So, in a way, it's just kind of, it could only be what it is. But I do believe thought that pain is the touchstone for all spiritual growth. You know, I think we're conditioned so much, and I'm conditioned to want to avoid pain and skirt pain and go away from it. But a lot of times leaning into it is where the change happens. Because when I'm in these moments where they strip away, like on the lawn out there with joy, that's so quick, it's so transitory. But when I'm in the ones that hurt, I somehow can inhabit it more fully, you know? So to me, that's the contemplation. And my daughter also, my 3-year-old, gave me this cross, and she got it somewhere, and she said, "Oh, Dad, I think this is yours," and handed it to me. And I'm like, okay. But I carry it now because I think of like time and space coming together in this moment. And so like I just hold it, you know, and I kind of worry it in my hands whenever I'm doing anything. And I just think, you know, whatever it is right now, I can die to it, you know. And in fact, we just had I was on the committee at First Presbyterian Wilmette to try to come up with the new theme for the church, you know, and I think it's like, you know, grow and love and, you know, whatever, cherish. I can't remember what we came up with, but I was like pushing really hard for wake up and die as, you know, to be the First Presbyterian Church of Wilmette slogan. I'm like, look, imagine the T-shirts, but I couldn't sell it. Yeah, you're welcome. Yeah. Yeah, I think it was just given out to all the little kids, you know. I think maybe that's why. So, but yeah, exactly. It feels like it's been like, you know, at the bottom of the sea or something, you know.
Anybody else?
I think so. I mean, I think, you know, as an actor and a writer, and now I make films, you know, I'm always trying to seek for truth, and I'm also, I feel like, struggling once you get into the real world. There's moral ambiguity. So some of you all live in the township might have heard of this, and again, I don't want to end on a sour note for those who might not share my perspective, but I made a film called Nuclear Tip of the Spear in spring, where I looked at what I thought was a pretty obvious injection of outside special interest groups and dark money into the elections here in New Trier Township for trustee. And it was very controversial. A lot of people were really happy with it. A lot of people were really not happy with it. So that becomes a really tough thing, you know, to kind of walk through that kind of furor, you know. I mean, Eric Zorn was writing about it, and attorneys were sending me cease and desist letters. So, you know, kind of maintaining that still point. And, you know, right now I'm actually trying to get ready to go to film market to sell it and look at it at a national scale, because I think it's a huge national, like, urgent story. But, you know, it's so tricky going into it. So yes, it absolutely informs it. But the problem that I have is all the things that I'm trying to do now, which is, you know, humility and, you know, not trying to control people and not, you know, and that's all the stuff I have to do that. So I was laughing to my wife yesterday. I felt like, you know, right now making this documentary, I feel like an undercover cop who's going to go into like the narcotics unit, you know, of like, okay, for the next 6 months, I'm going to have to shoot heroin and kick doors down, and I'll probably have to, you know, jack a few cars. But remember, I'm the good guy, you know. So yeah, the struggle's real.
You're wonderful. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Thanks, Tina. Thank you.
You said everything we've been trying.